Hey guys, Montel here, and thanks so much for tuning in to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. My guest today is an accomplished writer, director, executive producer for film and television. He's the executive producer and the lead director on the Good Witch series starring Catherine Bell, now in its seventh season. He's here with me today to talk about a film he wrote and directed that was just released. The film is called The Marijuana Conspiracy. The film is based on a true story of the government or the Canadian government experiment in 1972 on the effects of cannabis consumption by women. Craig Pryce, thanks so much for joining us today on Let's Be Blunt with Montel.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Montel.
Yes, sir. No, this is really kind of crazy. First of all, let's back up a little bit before we talk about the movie. How did you get your start in the entertainment industry?
I went to film school back in the day, and then I spent 2 years basically trying to make my first feature, which is really hard to pull off. But I managed to get it done. It was a horror film called Revenge of the Radioactive Reporter. It's actually becoming a bona fide cult film. I've actually had Fangoria interested in me re-releasing it, and a lot of people re-releasing it. And I went from there to another horror film called The Dark, which starred Nev Campbell, and we sold it to HBO and Miramax at the time. So it was really a great introduction. And then I sort of needed to get a day job, so to speak. So I went into television and I directed a fair bit of episodic, a lot of episodic. And then I missed the movie experience. So I started doing more TV movies where the director has more of a say in how things are done. And that morphed into, one of them was a show called Good Witch, which you mentioned, we did 7 movies for Hallmark, and then Netflix picked them up eventually. But after that, the network wanted us to morph it into a series. So we've actually done 7 seasons now of The Good Witch. So it's been a 14-year journey in that respect. But along the way, I've always been interested in other projects and off season done other projects. And that's why this one sort of came about.
Oh, gotcha. Well, yeah, Good Witch is now in its 7th season, like you just said.
Yeah.
And literally it's the highest rated show on Sunday nights on your outlet. So, cable. So it's great. How did you take the time to develop this project? What excited you about it and brought you to it?
Well, first of all, I found out about it about 5 years ago. And I always develop things along the way, and then I just go back to them when I have time and see what I can make. So what happened was this thing kept rising to the top of the pile. It's just such an interesting story. It started with an article in the Toronto Sun written about what happened in 1972. And as you mentioned, it's a true story. And when I started looking at the characters, the real women who went through this experiment, and looked at just the whole time in 72, the mores, the laws, etc., I said, this is an incredible story that nobody knows about, and it worked. There's so many layers to it that I wanted to get further into it. So I approached Diana, who wrote she's an investigative journalist, and I said, I need to know more about this because I'm seriously considering turning it into a film. So she gave me additional research, phenomenal details about everyone involved in the experiment on both sides. And then I got to actually meet the real women. And that sort of was a big turning point for me, that I was determined to make this a film, because they were so honest and open and vivid in their description of that time that it made it much more real for me, and how much more depth I could do in telling the story. So I just looked at what was going on back then and these women's lives, and I said, this is going to be a great film. Creatively, because I had done a lot of nice television like Good Witch and things, I wanted to get back into my independent filmmaking because I really started there and missed it. So I just thought, this is a challenge for me. I haven't done true story, and I haven't done a period piece, which is hard to do. Mm-hmm. But I just was determined, and I managed to have a great collection of crew and facilities and things from my Good Witch and things. So I called out to the team and said, you guys got to jump on board for this. It's a smaller film, but I really want to make it. And there was tremendous loyalty about that I really appreciate.
And did it take you back, or did you have to pause for a second to think? I get doing a period piece about an experiment, but this is about cannabis. And were you having to thread a needle there to make sure that it didn't seem like it was promoting cannabis too much, or the fact that it was literally, or not antagonizing, but really calling out the government the same way the U.S. government should be called out for some of the things that it's done when it comes to cannabis? But did that take you back at all?
Yeah, there's a lot of good questions all in that one statement. First of all, I looked at it and said, that's exactly why I made the film, actually. I didn't want to make something where people would say, you can't say this and you can't do that and this can't happen and that can't happen. I was very, I guess, determined that, it doesn't matter that cannabis is in it. It's an important part of the story, but it's also about these women's lives and the government. So, if you want to step back then, it was illegal in Canada in 72. If you had a single joint, it was 7 years in jail. And the federal government, Trudeau Sr. at the time, commissioned a study to see if they could be a little more lenient. The reason behind it's interesting, which we can talk about later. In the meantime, the provincial government here, which would be like a state versus the federal, they were dead set against it because in 72, they treated marijuana like a class 1 narcotic. So what that meant was, if not only did you get 7 years in jail, you couldn't go to college, you couldn't go to university. So they looked at that, and society in general was like, they didn't want to go near anything like legalization at the time, and they felt it was just fine because it was mainly just street people and small-time criminals using marijuana. So the provincial government did their own study, which was fascinating the way it was done and the ethics of it, but they had an agenda because they were so anti-marijuana. Interestingly enough, to answer the second part of the question, we even now have had resistance to this film. Social media won't let us do boosts. We can't have marijuana in our title on one of the social medias. Mainstream media is slightly reluctant to talk about it. And also the marijuana companies, because of all the regulations still exist, are like, this is an important film in our history and we want to support your movie, but we can't because our lawyers are telling us that we're promoting marijuana use and et cetera. And I said, well, you haven't seen the film, but so it's still, to a certain extent going on. And what you mentioned about the states, there's still certain states, as you know, where people are in jail still for marijuana use. And the federal government, hopefully the MORE Act, is going to be it will happen, I hope, because that will expunge people.
I laugh. I just chuckle a little bit when you say there are a couple of states where people are still in jail. There's across America, people are still in jail. This is going to be something that, I really wish I could have as much hope as you have. But I got to tell you something. Just like we see what's going on in this country when it's the last stand for attitudes of old, this is the last stand. This is the last opportunity that people get to utilize something as benign as a plant to re-enslave people.
Yeah.
And, you look at the divisions in America and you recognize that, I don't know if it's the same in Canada as it is here, but, and I don't think it is the same in Canada, but, clearly 80% of the people who've been arrested or prosecuted for cannabis use in the United States are people of color. This is an enslavement tool. And there are the powers that be who do not want to give up enslavement. It's so interesting when you say states where there are still people in prison. I mean, in all of the legal states, there are still arrests going on for cannabis.
I know.
But just make sure you depend on who you arrest. So I found it really just absolutely crazy. Talk a little bit more about, the kind of pushback you have for a film that to me is a look at an educational historic perspective. That's the way it should be looked at. I mean, we saying we can't even talk about cannabis, period. Nobody's talking about promoting its use, especially I don't think your film does that at all. I think your film literally takes a look back at the ignorance around some of the research that was done back then in the day and its real true impact on people. So I don't get why, especially why the cannabis industry wouldn't come behind and say, guys, take a look at this. This is something that you should look at and see the true history behind cannabis.
Well, that surprised me a lot because they are actually growing it and they are actually selling it. So why on earth they couldn't, again, if you see the movie, it's not an anti-marijuana film by any means. It's not a pro-marijuana film. It's you decide. It's really about the human condition and how these women were treated and the agendas and manipulation of the government to get results that they were looking for, which we can talk about in a minute. But yeah, I didn't understand. I guess I was a bit naive about it, that why whenever we did a boost on social media, it would get automatically rejected even with an appeal. And I had talked to some of the top people in the marijuana companies, and one of them does strains. They actually do scientific for municipal purposes and looks at all parts of the plant, not just THC and CBD. He really believed in the film and was told, though, by legal that there's too much combustion, like smoking in this film, that our community, it will be too controversial for our community. And their community, in fact, were people, marijuana users that were being studied and using them for medical purposes. So there's just basically, and this is what I do get concerned about, there's just a huge, it's when you read Bill C-43, which is our MORE Act, it's full of censorship, and it's completely, there's no freedom to sponsor, to support. They look at every single aspect. If you're 18, if it looks like careless use, it's endless, the regulations, which I suspect is in certain states as well. I think we have a ways to go, but I am optimistic that this is going to start to back off and hopefully not become a big conglomerate business too, because we're seeing now all the dispensaries are becoming big chains. They're the growers. And once that happens, they start coming up with rules and economic costs and license fees that stops the smaller dispensaries from actually having to do their business. And so we don't want this to become like, big corp, the industry itself, but I see that happening here already.
I think that freight train has already left the station and headed down the track. I mean, especially when you take a look here in the United States where, we have a president who literally 6 months before elected said that he still thought that cannabis was a gateway drug. And then just recently fired anybody on the staff that had admitted to prior cannabis use. So we're not headed in the right direction. I think we're headed in a direction that's going to shock a lot of people very soon. At out of one side of their face, a couple of weeks ago, the DEA lifted some of the restrictions on testing and on research, but then out of another side of the face, they slammed the door on some testing and research. So it's really, I think we're still caught up with having to wait for a generation to die before, we actually make some headway. Without giving up a lot of the story, because we definitely want people to watch, talk a little about, the 1972 experiment. And literally this experiment was kind of put together to have a predetermined outcome, correct?
Yeah. So the experiment, it's interesting because there was two sides to the experiment. There was the Addiction Research Foundation, which was the Ontario government's big brother over people who consume drugs or even drank alcohol. And they basically agreed to fund a social scientist who's buried in the film to do experiments specifically on the effects of marijuana on women, young women. That had never, ever been done in the history of studies. There was a few done on men at that time. They obviously thought, at the time, they thought when women consume marijuana, for example, they became extremely promiscuous and they jump on their roofs and play the saxophone and do crazy shit. And it all basically was just paranoia that was going on. So they first of all, they thought, well, this is something that's never been done. Let's see what happens. But the government, the Addiction Research Foundation, they assumed they had a control group. They had a control group and a non-smoking group and a smoking group. And what they thought was they would look at productivity. This is the social part of it. And they thought that the people who didn't smoke weed would be more productive. So they manufactured macrame belts. And they said they're going to make a lot more in a day because they get $250 each a belt. So there's a financial incentive. And on the non-smoking side, they will produce less and have less incentive and make less money and probably just lie around all day. That's what they expected the results to be. And there was a physiological part where they did a lot of blood work and things. They ended up with so much track marks in their arms, it was ridiculous. So then after that happened, as the study started, the smoking group were as productive, and there was a couple of them that were excelling beyond the non-smoking group. They actually were determined. They got really high every night, and they got up every day, and they went to work like anybody else. And this was the government was not happy about this. And so they said, well, we're spending all this money and we're doing this social study and it's not the results we want. So again, not to give too much away, but they did enhance the THC levels, and they had to smoke. Like, we all know, when you smoke a joint, you pass it around, you have your quantity that you're comfortable with. They had to smoke 2 big fatties, like, but 15 minutes apart, and choke it down. They couldn't share it, they couldn't pass it around. And so that was part of what was infused in them, was that they made it stronger and stronger and stronger. To not give too much away, it still wasn't the results they looked at or were expecting. So it's really dealing with a government and scientists that are and it's still happening in many ways. That's another conversation, but how to basically skew the results to what they want. And unfortunately, it was at the expense of these young women. And that's where the story gets interesting, because it really focuses on their resilience and their sisterhood, a very unlikely sisterhood, and how they came together and dealt with this. So it's really, it certainly has a lot of story in it about marijuana, but it's also as much a backdrop to their lives and what they went through before and during this experiment.
And it's a really powerful story of resilience when it comes to, forming bonds. I mean, I think the ladies really show. I was really impressed by just the way you told the story, and the women actually connected in ways that I don't think the scientists expected them to. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Now, what was your objective? I mean, again, we go into experiments, we go into films with an objective at the end. What was your objective when you decided to take this project on? Was it something to educate? Was it something to just reveal? What were you shooting for?
Well, the first thing, to keep in mind, I wanted it to still have entertainment value, because if you can't educate and inform if people are just sort of being lectured. And I didn't want to take a POV. I did not want to say, this is a movie where marijuana is bad, or this is a movie where marijuana is good. The most important thing for me, and it's been happening, and we're starting to have this conversation now, this was made so that people would watch it and then it would resonate with them and stay with them. Like, there's so many movies you go and see, and it was entertaining, you forget about it. So I just wanted it to be provocative, entertaining, and resonate, so that there could be conversations like this, not just about marijuana, but just the human condition, and talking about things like experimenting on humans. And actually, a lot of things are still happening now, sadly, not only around marijuana, but in general, that went on 49 years ago. And that is an important, when I did festivals, there was a lot of interesting discussion around that. And there's so many, like I say, so many aspects of the film and what happened 49 years ago that sadly is still headline news today.
Absolutely. I mean, and there are studies that are being done right now on cannabis that go where science is going into the study with an objective to come out of the study to say, see, we told you this is bad. If you take a look at the majority of the studies that the U.S. government does, they're always looking for some sort of a solution or answer that they can jump on top of and scream, see, we told you cannabis was bad.
Yeah.
Where there and a lot of results are coming out entirely different.
Right. Yep. I know. And that's happening in every industry, not just the marijuana industry. They look at, it's a simple thing of looking at what's happening with vaccines and all the information and misinformation. And then the science wants to tell you this, and you could read 2 papers and get 2 different stories on vaccines and the virus. And it's really tough, because if there is a bent and an angle of media or government or science, you have to do your cross-referencing and not trust everything you read or see.
Absolutely. Did you get an opportunity to screen this movie for the real participants?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I was really nervous. Not all of them are still alive, but the ones that I met, fortunately still are, and had really lengthy interviews with. I did a private screening for them, like virtual right now with what's going on. And I got some really good notes back, particularly from one of them who is advocating for the movie right now, who was in the actual experiment. And she felt, to a certain extent, it was emotional for her, because she felt like she was there again. But she felt, looking at the cultural and the societal things and the actual look of it and the time and stuff, was really, she thought it was really well recreated. And I was so proud to hear that. But she was most impressed with how the girls were represented and felt very connected to that. So I was very relieved, because when you do a true story, it's very different. There's a lot of responsibility there to represent people fairly and honestly. And so I was very happy that they all got back to me, and the one in particular just sent me the most beautiful email about it, and actually said on top of it she really enjoyed it, so that was good, and didn't want it to end. So that shows that at least it was also, an entertainer as well.
And I mean, and let's make sure we make it clear that you literally created, though the characters are based on the real participants, you kind of like amalgamated them all and put them together and pulled them back apart so that they really could not be identified, right?
Yeah, that was my deal. I felt, first of all, if you don't do that, you're making a different movie in the sense that you're doing a biopic or a documentary. To do that, you get involved with life rights and stuff. What I did was when I met them all, I explained that I wasn't going to use a real name, and that I was going to do a composite of their characters. And with that that's where I got so much honesty, truth from their experiences, because they felt safe with me and that I would honor that. However, everything that happened did happen to each character. It just might be more in a composite way. Like character A, B, and C parts of it might be in A and others in B, etc. I would give examples, but there's spoiler alerts. But yeah, but basically I can say that this is one of the most true, based on true stories there is. And then what took it, I think, to a different level was also getting into the laws and the morals of that time, because there was some really other disturbing things happening back then, and that really added to it. But everything about those women, I can say, yes, this person experienced this, and yes, this person had that lifestyle, and yes, so there was no need to exaggerate, other than to just make sure that they weren't specific, like oh, that's Auntie Mary or whatever.
Right.
But it didn't hurt the film at all. It did, in the sense that it didn't have to. There was nothing really to fudge, other than dealing with a narrative structure. And that was actually fascinating, to take all the character points and all the things that were happening at that time, and blending it and creating this this kaleidoscope, so to speak. And it was most enjoyable time I had writing something. And I did get a lot of feedback from people. That's how I work. And even on the set, we had the real women come and visit the girls that they portrayed, which was really cool. We got a picture of that. And there's a certain element where the ladies were thankful to us, because this story is little known, and they wanted it told, and they still want answers about what happened to the study and the experiment. But so it was really, it's really been cathartic for me to have gone full circle with them, from meeting them to them screening the film, and also enjoying that. And I think that was really the key to making it as honest as it could be, was the composite aspect of it.
And I mean, and it did end without closure, in a sense, for a lot of them, right?
Yes, and that's what makes an independent film. If this was something I was doing as a TV movie, everyone would want the closure. The arcs are really different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, because I had somebody tell me at a festival, they said, actually it was a really good review, and he said they'd never seen a film where they like certain people at the start so much, and by the end they don't, where other characters they don't like at the start and the end so much, and they like so much at the end. It was the biggest compliment I could ever receive. They were real arcs. So it was very, like, I really appreciated hearing that. But they also, like I say, they went on this journey, and some came in not in good shape. Like one was there to find herself. And at first it was really happy it was like hippie camp. She loved it. And as time went on, and then being watched all the time, that's part of the experiment. They were observed 24/7, except when they slept. And the isolation they had to deal with, it became harder and harder. It was not humane. And then of course the trying to, manipulate the marijuana to get the results they wanted. When all that happened, it made her worse off. The one thing, and again, not to give anything away, the marijuana wasn't really the problem in the long term. It was really just the isolation, and the way they were treated had more of a psychological effect on them and what happened. Some of them were like Teflon, like they went in and they just did their thing and made a lot of money. Some of them made no belts, but just wanted to party. I mean, they all had different places going. but the hardest thing for them all was to leave each other, because they did feel very connected. And I'd say to them, like, did you have little fights? Did people get cliquey? She goes, no, we were all in it together. Right? Sure, you have little, you might say you left the toothpaste cap off, what's wrong with you? But there was that really I was surprised, actually, that they said that. So yeah, so it was a really fascinating thing to tell the story, and to be able to talk to the actresses, and I think they're all really marvelous. But to be able to talk to them more about it and say, this is really what was going on in their head at that point and stuff like that. So, and they brought a lot to it as well. They really were committed to that, and just to do all the the ingestion and the combustion they had to do. It was a big commitment they made, but they all wanted to do it.
And what was one of the most shocking things that you found delving into research?
Well, I think the most shocking thing was human experimenting in 1972. There was zero regulations whatsoever. You could do whatever you wanted to anybody as long as they signed a half-page release form. I think it really disturbed me that they could just change what they were doing and how they were doing it. And what's interesting is when I did further research about human experimenting, in Canada, the first official regulations was 1998. It's almost this millennial. And the first ones I read, they were self-regulated. So the pharma company, the big pharma company that was going to do the experimenting with people or whatever, ingest them with their pharmaceuticals, they were the ones that policed themselves. And it wasn't until midway through the 2000s, basically, where they, like around 2005, where they got serious about them and said, this has to be third party monitored experimenting and regulations and application. So I thought the first thing it is, well, when did they start regulating human experimenting? And then I got past the 70s into the 80s. This is crazy. There was really lame ones in 88 that got thrown out in Parliament. But so that, I think that surprised me the most. It's just that you can do human experimenting, and globally it goes on still terribly, and that's I think the thing that, and also just how much we haven't changed. That was tough.
Right. Well, now you just did your global release on 420. So where can people see it at? Where can people pull it down? Is it available? Will it be available on all the streaming services?
Right. So we're just finishing it right now. We haven't done the international yet. We're doing North America. International's coming soon. So we did we played the virtual cinemas in the States because just for safety. But there's going to be a big push starting 420 to release the movie. But from that point on, it's going to be on absolutely every digital platform there is, and also on demand, cable on demand. So it's going to be absolutely everywhere. And the distributors, the Canadian distributor Vortex, and then Samuel Golden Films, who's doing the US, they're really behind the film and understand it and believe in it. So we're really excited with the release. And Goldwyn's known for quality, independent, and art films, and they just got 3 Oscar nominations for 2 of their movies. So I think we're with the right people that really understand the film and the themes, and also the aspects of the marijuana story and how topical it still is, and becoming more so.
Well, I mean, I think this movie's going to blow up. I think you're going to blow up way bigger than you think you are. And if it does, I mean, do you have any plans to develop out any more cannabis kind of related projects?
Oh, absolutely. I think what I would do, it's funny. There's a lot of stories I'm interested in, and I would probably pursue more of the documentary aspects of that, of the cannabis side of it, because I actually do have. I want to go back into documentary, because that's just like independent films. I think that there's so many stories to be told about cannabis, and they can make a difference. We did actually, it's funny, we did play a festival in Buenos Aires that's specifically for cannabis movies, documentary shorts and films. And then also we played, they want us to do another one. We can't because of our time release, but there's actual festivals dedicated to that. I saw some of the stuff and it really inspired me, some of those shorts and documentaries. So I think when I explore that part of it, it would be more on the documentary side than narrative, unless a really interesting story comes across again that has, a marijuana angle to it. I would not hesitate in a minute.
I mean, I find it's very interesting. A lot of the documentaries that have been done on cannabis, it really never really delved into the true history of cannabis. I mean, you know, a lot of people just go back to 1937 and reefer madness, but they skip everything that happened since 1590. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, a recent study showed that when they, you know, scraped the inside of Benjamin Franklin's pipe that had been sitting on his desk in the Smithsonian Institute for like, you know, 30, 40 years, they scraped the inside of that pipe and they realized Benjamin Franklin was smoking a little bit of that hemp that he was growing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, if somebody finally told the truth about what, you know, North America was built on, it was built not on tobacco and cotton, it was built on hemp. Um,
Absolutely.
so I think more people would recognize the, you know, the fact that this has been a part of our life for 500 years, really for 3,000 years, but part of recent man for the last 500. So you're thinking that might be something you might like to get into? I'd love to work with you on one of those.
Oh, that sounds great. There is a great history there for sure. I totally agree.
And now, what were some of the naysayers who you know seen it? I mean, we like to talk positive. Let's talk a little bit of negative. Any negatives out of the film that people would look at?
I think
Well, no, specifically those who were afraid to get behind it. I'm sure you sent them a copy of it to say, "What were you so afraid of?" What do they have to say?
well, it's a little early in its release. I mean, there's always the problem with critics. Some of them, if you're anti-marijuana or it's a long story, but I've seen a couple reviews that were remarkably positive and really understood the film, really understood it, and the characters and the role of marijuana and the control and the conspiracy of it. And then I've seen a couple of people that don't even want to talk about that, and they'll begrudgingly say, "Yeah, it was really interesting characters, and they really recreated the area well, but I'll forgive its flaws." And it's like, what flaws are you referring to? Like, there was very little mention of even what it was about, even though it's in the title. And so I thought, is this person anti-marijuana that's writing this film review, or what are they missing there? Or what am I missing? Because it didn't correlate to what the film really was about. I suspect that it might have an element of love or hate depending on your views on marijuana or your just views in general. And for that, I'd rather have something that's talked about and controversial to a certain extent than just, yeah, it was okay. So I'm ready for that. And I'm very, like I say, I'm very proud of it and the story it brings out. And I'm also proud that I didn't feel I took a bias, because I wasn't there to prove. I was there to tell their story. I wasn't there to say marijuana is great or marijuana is bad. I was just there to say, this is what they did with it. It's not the marijuana, and this is how they handled it. But it's interesting because one of the real women, she'd be in her 70s now, and she still uses marijuana for medicinal purposes. She says, helps me sleep better. I have sciatica. My husband makes me hash brownies every day. And so, she's still using it. One of the ladies said it was like eating too much chocolate after they force fed me that long and that much and that strong. It wasn't for me anymore. So it's really interesting how they all had different aspects to deal with.
Well, I gotta say, I think I applaud you for even making the film, the marijuana conspiracy, and I hope that all of my viewers, will go and download it and take a look at it. I really found it entertaining. I enjoyed it, and enjoyed the experience, and enjoyed the ride that you took us on.
Nice.
So I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to the next project that you put out.
Excellent. I really appreciate that and your time to highlight on your show. I love your show, and also to have watched the film and given it a bit of a showcase. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, sir. Thank you so much. Well, you've been listening to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Make sure you go out and watch The Marijuana Conspiracy. Craig Pryce, great work, my friend. And make sure you also watch The Good Witch. And yeah, you guys take care. Be well, sir. Stay safe. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.